Welcome to Chess, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So, I was kind of busy today, but I was able to kind of get back and squeeze a video in, so I figured I'd go back and grab another one of the games from the Chessable Masters. So, this is between Quang Liêm and Wesley. So, this is part of their final games that they played with each other. They ended up playing 7 games over their 2 match days that they played. And as you guys, of course, know, Wesley did win. Quang Liêm, he's been doing really good in tournaments recently. I mean, he's always kind of been somebody who, like, true chess people would know. But, he's definitely stepped his game up these past couple of months with these different tournaments and stuff that they've been having. So, is this not? Oh, there we go. Okay. For all of my people in the Philippines, I would say mabuhay to you. Masaya ako makita kay muli. Maraming salamat po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Magandang umaga, magandang araw, magandang hapon. Appreciate you guys. Kamusta na aking kaibigan. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by, taking a look at my stuff. Anybody who is coming from Vietnam, I will say Jiao Mui Nui, Cam on Ben. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. But if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look and see what we have for this game. So we have d4, knight comes to f6, knight comes to f3, we see d5, we see e3, and then we have c5. So what I'm getting, I don't really play this as white or really black myself, so I'm not super familiar with the position, but what it's showing me is the queen's pawn, and it's the Colle system. My experience with the Colle system would be more of, once the knight comes here, you'll see like a f4. Or sometimes people will just start off with f4, go e3, d4, and then put the knight here, then put the knight here, and knight b to d2 type stuff like that. That's my experience, bishop to d3 type stuff. So, but I mean, this is something that's like somewhat similar. So we do have pawn takes c5. And we have e6, and then we actually have b4. So this is kind of like a reverse like a Slav. A lot of the times, when you have a situation where, black goes, like a d5, c6, and you do have the Slav situation, sometimes they're able to take on this on c4, and then, they'll follow this up with b5. And like maybe a6, bishop to b7, trying to see if they can hold on to that extra pawn. So that's kind of what white is doing. But usually, doesn't matter if you're black or white, this usually overextends yourself, so you're not able to actually still hold on to the pawn. It kind of, like I said, it overextends yourself, and it kind of makes you, forces you to make a bunch of moves that don't really help your position, like development and king safety, stuff like that. So we do have a5, just immediately attacking this structure. We have c3, pawn takes b4, and then we do have b6. And for those of you that play against the Slav as white, this is a very similar way that you would try to attack this as black. You would go a4, and then you'd go b3, just trying to like break down the structure as much as possible. And usually you're able to get your pawn back. So that's pretty much what black is going to be able to do in this position. So bishop comes to b5. We see bishop to d7. We see bishop takes d7. Knight b takes d7. We have a4 because, as you guys can see, there isn't any way now to continue to hold on to this position, because if you try to take here, the bishop is going to take with the check, and you're just going to be losing 2 pawns, so you don't want to do that. So we have a4, pawn takes c5, and then we actually push b5. So as you guys can see, black has gotten their pawn back, and they're actually doing pretty good. And so g5. That's a move. So g5 is actually the novelty of the game. If we back up, I mean, some of the other options was like queen to c7, or we see like some bishop to d6s and stuff like that. I mean, those are actually very sound. This position is actually just like slightly better for black. So we do, but like I said, we do see g5. Like Quang Liêm does play this a little safe. He plays bishop to b2, which is actually probably one of the best ways to play it, because you definitely don't want to just go pawn grabbing, because the rook is going to come to g8. You're going to see f4. Of course, you're going to see h6, knocking the knight. Knight comes to f3, and then you have rook takes g2. And, I mean, this king is, like, not very safe feeling. So that is not going to be the best for white. So like I said, we do see bishop to b2, just avoiding all of that. We have bishop to d6, queen comes to e2, and then we do see g4. So now this is kind of inconveniencing white a little bit. Now they're going to have to back their piece up. So the knight f comes back to d2. We see queen to c7. We have f4, just trying to make sure that we block this diagonal as much as possible. We see pawn takes f3 en passant, and then we have knight takes f3. Rook comes to g8, but we have just-in-time castles by white. So, you know, both sides are doing pretty good. I mean, this is like slightly better for black. You know, these pawns aren't really too much going anywhere. And you do have your own passed pawn as black. And you kind of have the ability to start kind of pushing these pawns down the board. So black, you know, definitely has the ability to grab an initiative here. We have king to e7. And king to e7 is actually the best move in the position. You know, you've already messed up your castling rights on the king side. You know, you can possibly try to castle this side, but I mean, these pawns are kind of vicious looking over here. And it would also kind of mess up your ability to kind of break the position open because you're going to be leaving your king exposed. So the king is actually super duper safe on this square. I mean, it has a lot of protection pawn wise and, you know, piece wise around it. So, I mean, this is like a perfect little nestle area here. Knight b comes to d2. We see rook to g4. And, you know, black is kind of treating it as like they opposite side castled. So they're starting to like make a lot of, you know, attacks on this king side. And so it's actually looking very, very good for black. Queen comes down to d1, and then Wesley so finds the best move in the position, which is rook a to g8. And as you guys can see, I mean, we just have a lot of pressure bearing down on this g file. And so you are forced actually to go rook to f2. You definitely don't want to push one of these. And then you're going to be looking at bishop takes g3. And this is just catastrophic. Like, I mean, this is just this is just a nightmare, like right here. I mean, you know, you could take with the queen or the rook probably in this position. Like, you know, this king is sad. So definitely we're not doing that. So we see rook to f2. We see rook over to b4. And this is a pretty instructive point in the game because we actually go knight to f1. And something I will say about the position and about what just happened, like some of you guys might not even know what just got done happen. Because it's kind of one of those like unseen type of things. So when we're in this position here, we actually have a couple of different options. So automatically with this rook being on this file and you know, these other pieces being able to penetrate and also this rook being able to, you know, swing back over, this rook has a job of defending g2 at the moment, right? And so, you know, it already has one job. So what that's not what happened. So we're coming to f2. Okay, so what actually happened in this position is after knight came to f1, you actually just now assigned another responsibility to the rook. So the rook is defending g2, and it is also defending this bishop on b2. So something I want to talk to you guys about is, you know, be very careful when you start to assign multiple jobs for one piece, because the problem is you restrict its mobility. So if you can try to possibly give the job to another piece of defense, it sometimes ends up being better. Now in this particular position, there wasn't a lot better like moves you can make. I mean, there's bishop to a3, there's bishop to c3, but all of this still gave, you know, black the initiative and gave them the ability to just go on the attack and stuff. And this knight is going to be swinging in and stuff like that. I mean, you know, trying to trade off type stuff like that. So, you know, black is doing pretty good no matter how you cut it. But like I said, it's instructive because after knight came to f1, like Quang Liêm not only is giving this rook, you know, the job of protecting the g2 pawn, but he's also giving it the job of protecting this bishop. And Wesley So's next move exploits that and puts, you know, white in a really tough spot. And it is actually knight to e4 is what he plays. So as you guys can see, if this rook has to hold g2 and also hold the bishop, that means that it really doesn't have a lot of mobility. It doesn't really have a lot of places it can go. Now, of course, it doesn't have a lot of places it can go anyway because it literally can just only move like 3 squares. But let's say if the position was a little bit more open and you did have a situation where the rook kind of had like up and down and side to side mobility, if you have just assigned it 2 different jobs on the same rank, it can only move on the rank. So now the problem is the rook basically has to only go here or here, right? So, I mean, it's not so deep of a concept, but it's definitely something that sometimes people don't think about. You know, you're kind of looking at the game and saying, oh, well, what can I defend with? And you just kind of just, you know, unassumingly just kind of give the job to, you know, a bishop. Oh, before I forget, I almost did forget. I had a guy that's been with me for a long time. I've only known him as having you near me air supply forever. But he just told me his name was Romel. So Romel from San Jose Del Monte. I got you on a shout out. I'm gonna have to timestamp this because I didn't do it at the beginning. Maybe I'll just like respond back to the comment. But I appreciate, you know, you've been around for a really long time, so you're definitely somebody that, you know, I've recognized for a long time. You know, there's a nice handful of people, more than a handful of people that I've noticed that have been commenting, that watch all my stuff, that are always around and stuff like that. So, you know, I appreciate you as well as everybody else very much. And I try to show my appreciation by speaking Tagalog. And also by making sure that I respond to every comment. And even up until this point, with having, you know, almost 3,200 subscribers now, I'm still able to personally respond to every single comment. So, like, you look through my whole page and all of my videos, you guys see a personal response by me. So, I appreciate it very much. But like I said, you know, you have a situation where, and I mean, the rook has to move. And so, I mean, you know, you're kind of restricting this movement. So we actually see rook to c2. And you know, black is just like throwing the pressure on. Like, they're literally just like, man, I'm not gonna let you breathe. So we see queen over to a7, and queen to a7. It kind of seems like it doesn't do that much at the moment, but you know, black is anticipating the opening of this diagonal and like getting some situations to the king. Also, this bishop is possibly going to come to this square and just add way more pressure to the situation. So let's see what's going on. Queen comes to e1. We see knight e back to f6. Bishop takes f6. Knight takes f6. We see rook c to a2. And, you know, we're trying to like look at our position as white and try to take advantage of any of the like initiative that we have, which, I mean, we do actually have some passed pawns over here on the queen side. So, you know, let's see about getting those rolling. So we actually see rook g to g4. Queen comes to d1. We see rook g to c4. So this is a really interesting look for these rooks. Like, they're literally just like penetrated into white's position. You know, they're actually kind of safe. I mean, they do kind of have to worry about knight movements, which we're going to see in a second. But, you know, they're kind of deep in white's kitchen. We actually see knight 3 to d2 attacking the rook. So the rook comes down to c3. We see rook over to b1. And rook to b1 not only is attacking the rook, but it's also trying to make it to where we can try to push this pawn a little bit through the rook. So we see c4. We have a5. Rook takes b1, queen takes b1, and then we do have bishop to c5, like I was saying earlier. And as you guys can see, man, like, this pressure is like monumental. We have the bishop on this pawn, we have the rook on this pawn, we have the queen through on this pawn, and we really only are defending it once, and it is also pinned down to this king. Also, we have knight coming to g4 possibly. So, like, there is an immense amount of pressure on white. So, if you want to go ahead and pause the video and see what white does to try to, you know, defend this position and these threats, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. So I actually tried to throw you off by mentioning knight to g4 because knight to g4 is relevant. Like, not right now, but it is relevant in a few moves. But that's not the main focus of what we're trying to be looking at. And the answer, if you found it, I don't think this is the easiest move to find, but the answer is actually b6. Now, b6 does a couple of things. Number one, it attacks the queen. So that's like the most important thing. But also, it closes down this diagonal behind this bishop. It also, you know, if you were to be moving the bishop somewhere at some point, you know, this diagonal can become vulnerable. So it is doing a lot of, you know, doing a lot of things. If you guess h3, you know, h3 is not the time to play h3 at this particular moment, because the threat isn't knight to g4, because you already have 3 pieces on this point. And so, yeah, b6. And so now the queen has to find somewhere to go. So this is like almost like a check. Like, you know, black is pretty much having to parry this check. Queen comes to b8. And then we actually have b7 in the position. And this was the time. So, you know, if you thought about h3 before, like, definitely this was a move that you should be playing right now in this position. Because now after queen moves to b8, this knight to g4 attack of this pawn is actually very live. So you have to prevent it. So h3 needs to come so that you can prevent that. You want to be very careful, because if you do actually take bishop takes e3, Knight would take e3, rook would take e3, and then you'd actually have the check like I mentioned before on this diagonal. And this is pretty nasty. This is pretty nasty. These are some pawns that are like moving down the board very quickly. So you have to be very mindful of this, you know, and especially once they get to the 7th rank. So like I said, we did see b7, and this gives black a very, very crucial tempo to play knight to g4. Now, you are in a position where you are not defending this pawn, period. So we actually see g3 in the position, and knight takes g3. We see a6. Bishop comes back to a7, and you are going to see that this bishop is like monstrous on this diagonal, or in the defense of black's position on this a7 square, even though it looks weird. We see king to h1. We have to sidestep this check because that's pretty nasty, that check. Rook comes to d3. Knight takes e3. Rook takes e3. We see knight down to f1. Rook comes to b3. And that is annoying. That is really annoying. I mean, you know, black has their own set of pass pawns as well. Rook to b2. We see queen to e5. Rook takes b3. Pawn takes b3. And this is a very dangerous pawn on b3. You know, and then, I mean, the knight is really not the best piece to have in this particular position. And then the fact that you have all of these pawns in the middle of the board as black. And like I said before, this bishop is literally making it, you know, to where these pawns are going nowhere. So this bishop is serving like the most perfect purpose ever. Knight comes to d2. We see queen to e3. Queen comes to c1, which this pin can't be exploited. But we do see b2, which is a very nice trying to deflect move, because you don't want to move off this rank because you're going to be looking at queen comes to f1. Queen comes to e1 with check. We see queen to c7 with check. We see king over to f6, and then we see queen to f4 with check. And you know, this is actually a little bit annoying, because like you kind of really have to go into this trade because there isn't really any other way to check the king, and you definitely can't do something. You don't have enough time to queen your pawn because you're going to be looking at checkmate. So we definitely don't want to do that. So we see queen coming to f4, trading the pieces down. But, I mean, it's all downhill from there. Queen takes on f4. We see pawn takes on f4. King comes down to f5. We see king to g2. And, I mean, this is just losing your pawn as well. So the only piece that you really have that's trying to hold these pawns from coming down is going away. King takes f4. We see king to f1. King comes to e3. King comes to e1. We see king to d3. King comes to d1. And then we see f5. And it is in this position that like Quang Liêm does resign the game. And I mean, this position pretty much goes without saying as to why he resigned the game. I mean, you have these pass pawns, you have this pass pawn. This knight is, I mean, not very mobile. And like I said, these pawns are not going anywhere, especially this pawn's not going anywhere. So you're going to be queening. You're going to be forcing the knight into a position where they're going to have to give themselves up for a pawn somewhere. And you just have way more, you just have many more pawns. So that is unfortunate. But to try to get off real quick, maraming salamat aking kaibigan, and come on ban to anybody that's coming from Vietnam, and I'll see y'all next time.